Okay, so today I'm going to go over non-specific defenses. So this chapter is going to be divided into two main parts, and the last section talks about HIV, but the two main parts of the immune system are your non-specific defense, and then the second part is your specific defense. So what does that mean, non-specific versus specific? Basically, what that boils down to is your non-specific defense is a defense mechanism for your body that doesn't care what it is that it's fighting. It just is anything that doesn't belong in your body. So it doesn't have to specifically identify what it is that's attacking your body or what doesn't belong. And in the second part, which comes later, maybe probably next week, is talking about specific defense. And this is more about when your body first has to recognize what it is that's invading and then comes up with a very specific way of fighting that one particular pathogen, for example, coronavirus. So you make specific antibodies against the coronavirus that don't work against other viruses. That's part of your specific defense. But today we're focusing just on the development of how to identify the cause of a disease and then what some general defenses that your body has for non-specific defenses. So let's go ahead and get into it. So first we want to identify what's the difference between an infectious disease and a non-infectious disease. An infectious disease is anything that can be passed from person to person, and there are, I think, 5 main methods that infectious diseases can be spread. That's through air, food, water, body fluids, and animal bites. And so examples of infectious diseases: influenza, which is the flu, chickenpox, strep throat, dysentery, which is basically having uncontrollable diarrhea to the point where you can't hold fluids anymore and you die. Obviously, coronavirus would be in that category, and of course, AIDS. A non-infectious disease, you can't pass it to other people. So examples of that are cancer, heart disease, diabetes, cystic fibrosis, and hemophilia. None of those can be passed from person to person. So this is in the picture that you see there. His name is Robert Koch, I think, his German name. He was the first to establish a procedure to identify any pathogen that's responsible for disease. So pathogen is anything that causes disease. It can be a virus, bacteria, parasite, fungus. Yeah, anything that's going to cause disease. Koch looked at anthrax, and he looked at anthrax that occurs in cattle. And he observed that the cattle that had anthrax also had bacteria in their blood. So he hypothesized that the bacteria was the cause of the anthrax. But of course, in science, it's not enough just to say, well, this is the cause, therefore that's it because I say so. You have to back it up with evidence. So to test this hypothesis, he isolated bacteria from a cow that had anthrax, and he grew that isolated bacteria in a lab. Then he took what he grew in the lab and he injected it into a healthy cow. That cow then developed anthrax, so he concluded that the bacteria was in fact the cause of the anthrax. So based on his experiments, he developed what we call Koch's postulates, and a postulate is basically just a procedure. And these are the 4 steps to determine the cause of a disease. Number 1, the suspected pathogen must occur in the body of an animal with a disease and cannot occur in the body of a healthy animal. Number 2, the suspected pathogen should be isolated and grown in a lab culture. Number 3, if a healthy animal is injected with the culture, it should develop the disease. And finally, the pathogen from the second animal needs to be isolated, grown in the lab, and it needs to be the same pathogen as isolated from the first animal. We still use this procedure today to identify causes of diseases. So it's been around for over 300 years. Okay, so human diseases are caused by bacteria, virus, protists, fungi, and invertebrates. And like I said, spread in 5 ways: air, food, water. Those are the main 3. Then you've got person-to-person contact. This can be through bodily fluids like blood. Some pathogens can be spread through saliva and things like semen. And finally, animal bites. So your first line of defense for any disease is a physical barrier. The rule is if a pathogen can't get into your body, it cannot cause disease. So a non-specific defense, like I said, non-specific means it doesn't care what the pathogen is. It's going to protect you against anything that does not belong in your body. Because pathogens have to get into your body in order to cause disease, your skin is the first line of defense. As long as skin remains unbroken, it prevents pathogens from getting inside. So any break in your skin can allow pathogens to enter, like if you get this cut on your thumb. Large amounts of damage to the skin can be life-threatening. For example, people that have severe burns, people that are caught in fires, the burns can be open to infections. That's why a lot of times in the hospital, you have a completely separate part of the hospital that's called the burn ward. And that's because people that have severe burns like this are very, very susceptible to infections. And so they want to keep that wing isolated from the rest of the hospital because obviously people that are sick go to the hospital. So they're huge breeding grounds for pathogens, and you need to protect them. So when even the doctors and nurses that go into the rooms where these burn patients are, they wear masks, they wear hair nets, they wear complete I don't know what they're not the scrubs, but like the apron thing that goes over them, gloves, booties on their shoes, so they don't bring in bacteria on their shoes. They're completely protected. They're in total PPE. So not only is your skin a physical barrier, but it also continuously releases sweat, oil, and waxes. All of these contain chemicals that are toxic to a lot of bacteria and fungus. Your sweat also contains an enzyme called lysozyme, which can destroy the cell walls of bacteria. You also have a, what do they call that? There's a certain name, I can't remember the name for it because my brain is fried today, but it's basically a natural bacteria that lives on your skin that helps to prevent pathogenic or harmful bacteria from growing on your skin. In fact, I read somewhere that of all of the cells that your body is made of, your body actually contains more cells of other organisms than it does contain your own cells, if that makes sense. Because we've got bacteria that live in our large intestine, we've got bacteria that live on our skin, we've got mites, which are relatives of spiders and scorpions, are really microscopic, that they live in the follicles of our eyelashes and our eyebrows, and they feed on the oil and the dirt that gets caught in our follicles there where the hair comes out. But they're so small that your nerves don't even get triggered by them. Otherwise, we would be itchy all the time. But basically, we're made of more organisms that aren't us than cells that belong to us. That's the point, I guess. So anyway, we have bacteria that helps to prevent other harmful bacteria from growing. Okay, beyond skin, what kind of defense do we have? We have these epithelial tissues called mucous membranes. These protect interior surfaces of the body that may be exposed to pathogens. Mucous membranes line the respiratory and digestive systems, the urethra, and also the vagina. These serve both as a barrier and they secrete mucus, which is this sticky fluid that traps pathogens. If you've ever had a runny nose like that, that is mucus. And I know it's disgusting, but you know what? It is part of biology, it's part of our immune system, and there's a purpose for it. So any pathogens that are trapped, that get inside, if you breathe them in, they get trapped in that mucus. usually will suck that snot down and will swallow it. It will go to the stomach and it will be destroyed by the stomach acids. If you don't do that, you blow your nose and you just completely get rid of it out of your body. Since we just finished the respiratory system, the picture that you see down there is an example of cilia that lines the respiratory system. And we have mucous membranes there as well. So cilia helps to trap particles. And like I said, the mucous membranes are there to trap as well. So the cilia constantly sweep the mucus and the pathogens up. So it actually sweeps up towards the pharynx, which is the area at the back of the throat. And so, like I said, that's swallowed and forced to the stomach and destroyed by the stomach acid there. So we've got skin and we've got mucous membranes. Another non-specific defense we have is something called the inflammatory response. And you've all experienced this, I guarantee. A pathogen that enters stimulates a non-specific defense mechanism called the inflammatory response. So how this works, it's going to be in a series of steps, right? So if a pathogen comes in, or it doesn't even have to be related to a pathogen, it might just be cells that are damaged, like maybe you accidentally get scratched or a mosquito bites you or something like this. But in any case, like cells are damaged. The damaged cells release a chemical called histamine. Now, histamine does two things. It increases the blood flow to the injured area, and it also increases the permeability of the surrounding capillaries. Can anybody think of a reason why you would want to do that for damaged cells? Why would this be beneficial? Or do you just not want to answer any questions? Do you want me to do it all?
The blood, the circulation of the blood occurs because the transportation of oxygen, right? And the damaged cell, that means that the cell is damaged, right? And maybe they're bleeding, something like that, and it needs to be fixed.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So if that's good. So if you have damaged cells, then yeah, exactly like you said, that there might be damaged blood vessels. If capillaries are broken, then you need increased blood flow to get platelets there. If you have damage to tissue or damaged cells, especially if it occurs like on the outer lining of your body, that could be an entryway for pathogens to get in. So you're going to need white blood cells to get there as soon as possible. So that's the reason for number 2. Increasing permeability of surrounding capillaries is going to allow white blood cells to get there really quickly. Good. So fluids, white blood cells pass to the injured area. The reason why fluids would go there is because you want to kind of flush out, just like the reason why we bleed, obviously because the skin is broken. But sometimes, I'm sure probably you've all experienced this at some point. If you get a cut or a scrape, even if the bleeding stops, you still get a bit of, it's called weeping, like a little bit of a clear fluid that leaks out from the wound. This is lymph. And so what that's doing is helping to flush the damaged area in case there's any pathogens that got in, and they can just kind of flush it out like that.
The inflammatory response can be triggered by an invasion of bacteria.
Substances released by the bacteria and by damaged cells accumulate in the tissue.
Small blood vessels become more permeable, and plasma fluids and proteins leak out.
Plasma proteins attack bacteria and attract white blood cells.
White blood cells engulf bacteria and help repair damaged tissues.
Okay, so that's how the inflammatory response works. So a result of increasing blood flow to the area and increasing permeability of the blood vessels is that you're going to get redness, swelling, and warmth, as shown by the picture down there. You get swelling because you're increasing both permeability of blood vessels and increased blood flow. So you've got more fluids going to that area. It's red because of the increased permeability. So you've got more blood in that area. And of course, warmth because of that as well. And sometimes there might be pain depending on if there's any nerve endings involved in the damage that occurred in the beginning. So on the left is just a diagram of how the inflammatory response works. So you have damage to the skin. You've got the damaged cells and the bacteria trigger the release of histamine. Histamine increases blood flow to the area. So not only for the actual wound that occurs on the outside here, if there's blood vessel damage, then you'll have the platelets releasing the chemicals that will cause fibrin to build up and a blood clot to form here. And you've got the white blood cells, which can leak through the walls of the capillaries to help digest the pathogens. Right, so if blood vessels are damaged, like I said, we have blood clotting that occurs, which helps to seal off surrounding tissues so that if there is pathogens that get into the body, the blood clotting will prevent those pathogens from traveling further into the body and causing problems elsewhere. Now, the chemical signals that are released by the injured cells obviously also attract white blood cells. And so what you might end up happening is the development of pus, depending on the kind of damage and how long it takes for the white blood cells to clean up the injury. So pus is a thick whitish or yellowing fluid that often collects in the wounds. So it contains both white blood cells and dead pathogens. And it is a sign that white blood cells have arrived and are fighting. And so something like this. In this example, this is probably not a good thing to let continue because there's way too much buildup of pus there. So what the doctor will do is come in with a scalpel and will lance or cut that and release all the pus, because if it stays there, it can become too much infected. And you can kind of see the redness and swelling area there from the inflammatory response. And then this is where most of the pathogens are located. That's why you've got this really big concentration of pus. And of course, we have the good old pimple, which is the same thing. Just a buildup of bacteria and white blood cells that clog up a pore and form the pimple. Okay, another nonspecific defense, there it is the phagocyte. Now, the phagocyte is a particular white blood cell that's involved with the inflammatory response. And the reason why they're called phagocytes is because they engulf pathogens by phagocytosis, which is something that we learned last year. Basically, it surrounds and engulfs the pathogen and digests it using enzymes. The most common phagocyte is a white blood cell called a neutrophil, and you can see it here. The darker purple areas, those are all enzymes. So you can see most of the neutrophil is enzymes. These make up 50 to 70% of all white blood cells. And like all white blood cells, it can squeeze between the cells and the wall of the capillary. It's not very useful if your white blood cells cannot access all parts of your body.
Taken from the blood of a graduate student, are mobile cells that will quickly migrate to sites of injury to help fight infection. They are attracted there by chemical signals that are released by other cells of the immune system or by invading microbes. In this experiment, tiny amounts of chemoattractant are released from a micropipette. When neutrophils sense these compounds, they polarize and move towards the source. When the source of the chemoattractant is moved, the neutrophil immediately sends out a new protrusion, and its cell body reorients towards the new location.
I don't know what's up with that bird sound at the end. But you can see how very responsive the neutrophils are. So when they move the micropipette around, they're chasing that chemical. And so they're really, really adept at being able to chase pathogens.
The white blood cells are an important part of our body's immune system. Neutrophils are a special group of white blood cells that play an extremely important role in protecting the body against infections. Mature neutrophils do not divide. New neutrophils are constantly formed in the bone marrow where they develop and mature. Mature neutrophils are released into the blood where they circulate for 3 to 12 hours and then move to other tissues where they survive only 2 to 3 days. These mature neutrophils can be found in large and small blood vessels, as well as in the tiny capillaries in different tissues. In the bloodstream, neutrophils act as certain blood cells, searching for infections. Neutrophils can sense a site of infection because of chemicals that are released by the bacteria. Upon detecting these chemicals, neutrophils slow down and begin to stick to the walls of the blood vessel. They then squeeze between the cells of the blood vessel wall and enter the infected tissue. Here, the neutrophils crawl towards the infection as they continue following the chemical signals. At the site of infection, bacteria are coated with antibodies of the immune system and marked for ingestion. The neutrophil recognizes the marked bacterium, engulfs it into its body, and traps the bacterium in a sac called a phagosome. The neutrophil contains pouches called lysosomes, which are full of digestive enzymes and chemicals that can kill bacteria. The pouches, or lysosomes, then combine with the phagosomes containing the bacteria and release the enzymes and chemicals, resulting in the ultimate death of the bacterium inside the neutrophil. After killing and digesting the bacteria, the neutrophil is spent. Having completed its duty, the neutrophil shrinks in size and breaks up into smaller pieces that can be recognized and eaten by other cells.
Sad. They sacrifice themselves. Okay, another type of white blood cell, and this one's going to be involved in both non-specific and specific defense. But for a non-specific defense, they consume and destroy any pathogen they meet. They're basically circulating through the blood at all times. They are also responsible for getting rid of worn out cells and cell rubbish. So in the previous video, when you saw the neutrophil, once it takes care of all the bacteria, it basically breaks down in a process called apoptosis, which is cell death. And then the macrophage will come along and reuse and recycle all those parts. So some macrophages you have stationed in tissues of your body, and others are basically on patrol throughout the circulatory system.
What is cell rubbish?
What?
What is cell rubbish?
Oh, rubbish, garbage.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, rubbish is just garbage. Ooh, that loud in my ear. Okay, I just want to go back here for 1 second. Where is it? Da-da-da. There we go. Okay, so one of the things that it talks about, now my iPad screen doesn't look the same, so I'm going to try to, yeah, there we go. So phagosome, what is that? I just wanted to draw a line between this and what I taught you last year, because one of the other videos talked about this as well. So when white blood cells engulf a pathogen, the process that's being used is phagocytosis, and it's a version of endocytosis, if you remember endocytosis. So endocytosis is a process of bringing in large particles or a large amount of small particles into the cell. So if you, just in case you don't remember that, that's when you have a cell membrane like that. And let's say you've got here's your bacterium. And so what's going to happen is the cell membrane is going to start to fold in like this and kind of swallow the bacterium. Okay, I'm going to go down here then. And then finally it pinches off completely and the bacterium is inside. And then finally you've got this vesicle with the bacteria inside. Now this vesicle is called the phagosome. And if you remember from last year when we talked about all of the organelles, one of the organelles we looked at were vesicles. Now some means vesicle. And vesicles are named by their contents. So in this example, it's a pathogen inside, and the pathogen came from phagocytosis, so it's called a phagosome. So you've got a vesicle that's got a pathogen inside of it. Now, what happens once it's inside the white blood cell is that, if I can get a new screen because I've taken up all that space. Okay. So then what happens is, here's your cell, and what color was it? Here's the vesicle, there's a phagosome, and here's my pathogen. You're going to have another vesicle come along, and this is a lysosome. You remember what lyse means, or lyso means to break. And that's going to have enzymes, my little blue blobby stuff in there, that's enzymes. So what's going to happen is inside the white blood cell, the phagosome is going to fuse with the lysosome. So then the pathogen is exposed to all of those enzymes and it's broken down. So it's really efficient the way that it works, because all of these vesicles are made of a lipid bilayer, just like the cell membrane. So they can all fuse together in all kinds of combinations. Okay, and then another non-specific defense mechanism we have, and these guys are also part of specific defense. These are my favorite white blood cells. These are called natural killer cells. These are large white blood cells that actually attack cells, your cells, that are infected. So what happens when your cell becomes infected? So back to natural killer cells, right. So these guys actually don't care about the pathogen itself. It only cares, and the whole reason why I brought up the whole spike protein vaccine sidetrack is that when a virus infects your cells, those spike proteins from the virus get displayed on the cells that are infected. And this is how your body knows which cells are infected and which ones aren't. So it's basically like, I guess like if you ever play paintball and you get hit with a paintball and that like labels you like you've been shot, and so you have to get out of the game, it's kind of like that. So when a virus infects your cells, it displays those proteins, so your immune system knows which ones to fight. So your natural killer cells are the ones that go around and attack the cells that are infected. The way that they do that is that they stab the cell membrane and the cell basically implodes, kind of like popping a balloon. And these guys are actually really efficient at killing cancer cells to a point. The problem occurs if the cancer cells are replicating too quickly, or if they metastasize, which means that they break off and they spread to a new area of the body. Natural killer cells are also quite adept at killing off HIV infected cells for a while, which is why when you get infected, or if you get, like, if someone's infected with the HIV virus, it might take them up to 10 years to actually develop AIDS. And even now we have so much medication and treatments that a lot of people just stay HIV positive forever and they never actually develop the disease. But that's a topic for section 3. Anyway, so natural killer cells basically go around and stab infected cells. The water rushes in and they explode. And let's watch a video of that happening. So that's when it exploded. Okay, I think we get the point there. Cytotoxic T cells, by the way, are the same as natural killer cells. Any questions so far about all of these non-specific? So keep in mind that the whole point is that you've got all of these defenses that are going to fight anything that doesn't belong. It doesn't have to be able to recognize what it is. Okay, I guess everybody gets it. All right, another way that your body has to defend against anything is a fever. Fever, obviously an elevation in body temperature that's above normal. This is a sign that your body is responding to an infection. Some pathogens and some chemical signals are released by macrophages, and these can trigger a fever. Now, you might ask yourself, why a fever? Why would our body temperature be elevated? Because a moderate fever stimulates your body's defense. It actually increases the activity of your white blood cells. And at the same time, if it's a bacterial infection, having a higher temperature will suppress or slow down the growth of some bacteria. And like I said, it increases activity of your white blood cells. However, high fevers are harmful. Remembering back to last year when I taught you about proteins and enzymes, and having a temperature that's too high causes proteins to denature, which means their very particularly folded shape of the amino acid sequence falls apart. This is why an egg white turns from a clear liquid into a solid white color, because the protein called albumin in the egg white gets denatured when you cook it. So if your body temperature becomes too high, then okay, yeah, you're suppressing bacterial growth, but you're also, your own body's proteins and enzymes aren't going to work because they're going to start to denature. Body temperature of 39 and up is dangerous. If you get higher than 41, it can be fatal, which means you can die. So people that go to the hospital with super high fevers will usually either be put in ice baths, or now they have these special cooling blankets that they can put on to help try to bring your temperature down. Now, believe it or not, you actually have proteins that can help provide a non-specific defense. You have about 20 proteins in your body that make up what's called the complement system. Complement proteins circulate in your blood and activate when they meet certain pathogens. Some, that should be form, I'll correct that after. That should be form. Ring-shaped structures that puncture the membranes of infected cells. So they kind of do the same thing that natural killer cells do. And we have proteins called interferons. These inhibit the reproduction of viruses. Now, keeping in mind that viruses are only, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. Dangerous, harmful, concerning, if they reproduce, because viruses can't reproduce by themselves. So they need to be able to infect your cell and make your cell reproduce virus for them. So interferon helps to prevent that. Cells that are infected with a virus are going to make small amounts of interferon, and that is going to stimulate the cells around the infected cells to make enzymes that are going to stop the synthesis or the production of viral proteins. So that prevents the virus from reproducing. And if the virus can't reproduce, then your non-specific defense, like your macrophages, your neutrophils, can come in and clean them all up. Are there any questions?